Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm sad to report that the truck is back on the lift. It was doing so good. It wasn't leaking anything. It was driving along great. Then I was getting on the highway the other weekend and it shifted from first, shifted into second. And then when it got to third, there was nothing. It just kind of revved up. And then fourth gear was kind of the same thing. So I tried manually shifting it into third. That didn't work. The only gear that I could get to work at that time was second gear. So I drove it home in second gear. It sounded cool, but that's not ideal. So I contacted Monster Transmission, who built the transmission, and they only offer a 90-day warranty. But they were kind enough to say, okay, Eric, we'll take a look at it, send it off to us, you pay shipping and all that stuff, and we'll look at it for you. So that's what they're gonna do. In this episode, I'm going to pull the transmission out of this, and by the end of it, hopefully I have it back from Monster Transmission, back in the truck, and everything is good to go. And along the way, I hope to find out exactly what the issue was. I've asked Monster to help me out on that side of it. But for now, let's go out on a test drive and see what's happening with the truck. All right, here's the issue and what's happening with the truck. So, it's first gear, second gear, third, it just kind of slid in. Wait a second. Okay, now it's working better. Before it would just rev way up and I wouldn't be moving forward when it hit third gear. And then when I tried to shift it manually, all right, well, it's kind of working now. But when it happened, third and fourth gear were out, like down for the count, out. And I'm not entirely sure what happened. I've already committed to sending the transmission out and getting it rebuilt, looked over. I've also never really been too happy with the 1-2 shift, meaning I always felt that it shifted too soon out of first. It was shifting out of first like 9-10 miles an hour with just light throttle. I like to see 18 to 22 miles per hour on like medium throttle acceleration. It just never seemed to go up for the RPM range. So if nothing else, I'm hoping they get it sorted. Here we go again, first. There it is, it went into third. It was just kind of like, okay. So it's not 100%, it's not where it was. And once again, given that I have the opportunity to send it off to Monster Transmission and have them go through it, I'm gonna take it. So that's where we're at. Now we need to get this transmission out of here. Now the fluid level might be a touch low, but nothing that I'm really concerned about. Nothing I feel would cause an issue with just one gear in particular. Also, the fluid doesn't look all burned up and brown, doesn't smell bad. It looks right, so I don't think fluid level or anything like that is the issue. So what's the first thing to do when removing a Chevrolet transmission with a V8 engine? That's take the distributor cap and rotor off. As the engine sinks back down towards the firewall, this thing can get crushed. So you're best off just taking it out of the equation first thing. I'm also going to disconnect the negative battery cable as well. I'm going to take the rotor too, just for good measure. Put that someplace safe. For me, there's also an LO2 sensor to disconnect up here. There were a couple of wires that I zip tied to the dipstick tube, which I have just taken care of. And now I'd love to show off my no leaking engine. Now I just noticed that there's a little teeny tiny bit here on the transmission pan, but I'm gonna say that's residual stuff left over from when it was leaking before, because there doesn't appear to be anything new anywhere. I'm very pleased about that. One other thing that I'm pleased about is the fact that this transmission pan has a drain plug. That just made my life so much easier. They made this one a 15/16, I believe. No, I'm sorry. They made this one a 3/16. I'm gonna give that plenty of time to drain out. I went to lunch and came back. That should have been sufficient for it to drain out as much as it could. Now for the exhaust, which for me involves a couple of O2 sensors on the Y pipe here. The other one, let's see if we can get that connector down from up top. Sweet. As long as we're here, there's a big old connector going to the transmission I can disconnect. Beats that they're A strategically positioned cart catches bolts. Except for that one. This is why I keep my shop floor clean. I'll admit I have no idea where that one went. I made a couple of hold downs for some wires that are on the rear cross member that I'm going to need to remove. Also, this shift linkage here, I'm just going to take the whole thing off. And this is my temperature sensor right here that also needs to be unplugged. And I think that's all the electronics. Yeah, save this guy, which I need to undo. I love me some zip ties. This couldn't have come to rest in a better position for this. Just pee all over my tool cart. I don't care. Dealing with the electrical connections on the starter is going to be a pain in the butt, so I'm hoping I can just drop it down and let it hang. Now I have access to where I can spin it around and get the torque converter bolts. About now, I'm super happy that I converted the crank bolt over to a 12-point ARP crank bolt. It is a lot easier to get the socket on. It stays on, unlike the original one where I had a heck of a time trying to keep my socket on it while I spun the engine. I'm thinking these cooler lines may be the last thing that's actually connected. I will be flushing these out. I think all I gotta do is the cross member and the bell housing bolts. Transmission jack time. This fender hook cover has graciously volunteered to be the padding underneath this nice aluminum transmission pan. Thank you, fender cover, for your sacrifice. Lift it up so I can get the cross member out. And drop it down ever so slightly to gain access to the bell housing bolts. A lot easier to access those bell housing bolts now. Before I get too far with this, I don't want the engine dropping down too far. So I'm gonna jam this block of wood up under the oil pan in hopes that it helps keep things from dipping down too much. Almost had it. Just gonna loosen this one down on the side and pull the dipstick tube up out though. One of the fasteners was holding it to the bell housing. Now that it's not there, I can just slide it up and out. I'm gonna grab this transmission mount while I can. You gotta strip the whole thing down before you send it to them. No sensors, no nothing. All right, it should be ours. My exhaust, I've got it hung up with a bungee cord. Now it's just my hope that the engine doesn't get too crazy. Whoa. That went much faster than anticipated. We have a transmission on the transmission jack. There's a look at the back of my engine. What was once an oil-soaked mess is now dry as a bone. Only had to rebuild it 3 times. I want to make sure this guy stays put. I want to take the torque converter out and drain it. And I really don't want the transmission falling off while I'm doing that. I knew you were going to be messy. See, I know you. I want to remove my temperature sensor because I don't want that to leave. Now do you see why I let it drain over lunch? There's always more. But I also want these, because these are special adapters that I had to get to make this all work. In other words, if I want it back, it comes out now. Now, to avoid being that guy, I'm gonna fill all the holes with plugs. Last but not least, to protect the tail shaft, I have one of these laying around. And now the transfer to the pallet. With the torque converter out, I'm hoping it's not super heavy. And we will sacrifice you. This way we just set it down and we're done. Get some ratchet straps, put the torque converter in it, ship it. There you are. I decided to take an extra step, wrap it in a trash bag. I just lifted up one end, slid it underneath, lifted up the other end, pulled it through. But it's on there. I also put a bracket to hold the torque converter in place so that wouldn't go away. It's not going anywhere. A couple of 6-foot ratchet straps from Harbor Freight. Good to go. With the transmission removed, it's the perfect opportunity to clean up all this oil residue that was left over from my leaking engine. I think I'm gonna take care of that now. Even with the safety glasses, ow, brake clean. It stings. I think that'll do. I picked up a set of these wheel dollies. I'm gonna try them out for the first time here with the truck since the other ones are being used right now. I just realized something. I hope I've got enough room to sneak by here. If I don't, I'll have to take the front ones off and rethink it. Gonna have to open this one up a bit. To open it up, I just flip this and pull them apart. But now I gotta flip it back and try to get this in tight. And then just pump. That is crazy cool. One more, I think. It's so awesome. I'm not advertising for these guys. I bought these myself. That is slick. All right, let's see if she moves. Oh, it's like butter. After some jockeying and negotiating and vehicle moving and all that type of thing, I was able to push the truck back into this spot, which it's gonna wait there until they come and pick up the transmission, which they were supposed to do today, but it's like 2 o'clock and I haven't heard from them. I'm not gonna be around tomorrow, so we'll have to see how this ends up. Anyway, it's back out of the way until, well, we come back and we've got a rebuilt transmission to install. I'll see you then. Welcome back, viewers. Well, it's been a minute since I removed the transmission from the truck and sent it off to Monster Transmission for its rebuild. I've had it back for a few weeks, but I had some other jobs that I needed to do. But anyway, the transmission is now here. I think it arrived sometime in early April, so I don't really know how long the turnaround was, a few weeks or whatever. But the transmission is here, the truck is on the lift, I'm ready to install it. Now, I asked Monster Transmission what they found inside that transmission that was a problem. And I couldn't really get a clear answer on that, and that's somewhat disturbing to me. And also they said they just went in and redid the full rebuild and that was that. So apparently I've got a fresh brand new transmission, but it smells suspiciously like they might have NPF'd me, and what that is in work order slang is no problem found. Maybe that was the case. And if that is the case, I kind of needed to know that if there was a mechanical issue. If there's not a mechanical issue, that leaves electronic. This is an electronically shifted transmission. Now, I've already replaced the controller once on their recommendation because, as I've mentioned, I never liked how quickly the truck shifted from first to second gear. It was barely in first gear at all, and it was already shifting to second, even, under light throttle, what have you. Anyway, it just seemed a little quick to me. If I put this transmission in and everything is fine, great. If I put this transmission in and at some point I lose third and fourth gear again, I'm looking at an electronic problem I need to sort out, which could be in the valve body or someplace else. So along the way today, I'm also going to check my electrical connections on that transmission controller, as well as on the transmission, to make sure that everything is clean and connected well, so that electronically it's functioning as good as it can. Anyway, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in detail on reinstalling this. I'm sure you, like me, want to know if this actually works. So let's get to that. This is the transmission controller here. And just to be on the safe side, I'm gonna disconnect it, look at all the pin connections, make sure everything is good, just to be on the safe side. And I managed to get its container into this location through some persuasion. I also ordered a case of transmission fluid that I purchased to go with this. Hopefully that's inside of here because it didn't get sent separately. So you're gonna see this for the first time, just like me. Looks like they separated the torque converter, and here is my transmission fluid. Looks like the transmission got some cleaning and a new sticker. The sticker was peeling off. Yeah, there's nothing on here that they says they did anything other than apparently a rebuild. Put the torque converter on the workbench for when we're ready for it. The same with the transmission fluid. The screws I don't care about, but those look like washers I'll keep. Hate to be that way, but I'm that way. Now the smart thing to do here is to get a buddy to help you lift it up onto the transmission jack. Or I could grab my engine hoist and lift it up off of here and use that. I never claimed to be smart. So far I'm all right. I've got a couple of things I want to do before I install it. Let's talk about those. I don't like it already, and here's why. You might notice the oil residue down there. Well, that's engine oil, that's not transmission fluid. And those little gold bits there, that's paint from the torque converter that was in there. So that says to me this never got cleaned. And was this ever really taken apart? I don't know. But if it was done with haste. And I say this also because of this, which I find even more disturbing. If you look at this O-ring on the end here for the torque converter lockup, you see how it's like chewed up a little bit there? That's a bad thing. So I need to correct that. So I'm gonna get that O-ring off of there and replace that before I put the torque converter on. Luckily, I'm prepared for this situation. It was a while back that I decided I needed a large assortment of O-rings. So I have metric O-rings, standard O-rings, more standard O-rings, or O-rings, and those might be metric, I'm not sure. They look metric. And then these, which is probably where we'll get the O-ring that I'm looking for. This O-ring is critical too, as far as the lockup torque converter goes. Here's a closer look at that damage. It's not much, but it's enough to give me pause. I need to try to find one that's not just the same diameter, but the same thickness. I think out of all of them, I like that one the best. It's a little small and it's a little thick, so it might just work. Let's try that one. I think that'll do nicely, actually. And don't worry, it's not going in there dry. I'm gonna try to get rid of some of that residual oil that seems to be left over in here. Yeah, this paint does not like brake clean, that's for sure. We're gonna need a torque converter. Oh, it's got a new sticker. The rule with torque converters is never ever install them dry. We'll fill this guy up with the transmission fluid. Every time I tip it sideways, more flows into the converter. If I can get this whole quart in, I'll be happy. It might just happen. It's officially one whole quart that I was able to get in there. To help protect the seal on the outside of this, on the front pump, I'm gonna coat this with some transmission fluid. Going to install it now. And the important thing here is, during installation, you sort of need to move it and push it in, and it's usually like 3 different engagements that you feel before it finally bottoms out, and it must bottom out. If not, and you try to bolt this thing up, you could mess some stuff up. So make sure it's fully seated and fully engaged. There's one. That might be it. Yeah. That feels fully engaged. A couple of things that I removed on the outside of the transmission: the adapters for the cooler lines, the temperature sensor, and also the speed sensor. I'm also going to come in here with a little bit of compressed air and blow out this connector. I did find just like a little thread or a little piece of fabric down in there. Those pins are critically important. They tell everything when to shift. So I'm going to make sure that this is absolutely clean when I plug it together. I'm also going to check the plug before I connect it. Also want to make sure that all those pins are nice and straight, nothing's bent over. This is part of that electrical connection inspection that I'm doing to make sure that everything's the way it should be. I'm a little sad because I sent it off with a plug that went into the back here and I didn't get it back. I'm gonna have to maybe look for another something to go in the next transmission that I'm trying to keep stuff from dumping out of. I'm gonna put a little bit of thread sealer on these when I install them. The speed sensor has an O-ring, so there's no need for sealer on that, but a little bit of transmission fluid on the O-ring before I install it. And lastly, I'll get my temperature sensor in there. A little bit of sealer on the threads for this one as well. I noticed that these lines, or these adapters, bottom out on these bosses. So that means that it's not likely to seal via the threads. There's likely some kind of sealing washer or something that goes under here. I happen to have some. I'm going to see if I can size them, and I'm going to put those in now. Here's the assortment of sealing washers that I have. I'll still leave the sealer on the threads. One more thing I want to do before installing this transmission, and that is flush the cooler and the cooler lines. Anytime you have any kind of transmission failure, there could be metal bits or debris that's in the cooler and then the lines, and you don't want to send that into your new transmission. So you want to flush it out. I'll show you this can of stuff that I have now that is intended for this very thing. The return line is the top line and the feed line is the bottom line. I'm going to back flush it. So I'm going to go in through the return line and then it's going to come out here into my oil drain here. And this is the product that I'll be using for this today. Like I said, it's specifically made for this. In fact, it screws right onto the line. I plan to use the entire contents of the can. That's better. Coming out of here nicely, I hope you see it. Like a fine milkshake. Ooh. I think it's empty. Definitely empty. That didn't take long, and I wish I could have shown you like all the foam and everything that was down in there, but it cleaned it out for sure. I guess the takeaway is make sure this is tight. And I just use a piece of 3/8 fuel line to help guide it into my, well, you know what? I'm gonna leave that in there because I'm just gonna run a little bit of compressed air to get the rest of the stuff out. I hope that eliminates all the stuff in the lines if there was any. And with that, I'm ready to reinstall this transmission. I don't really feel the need to cover this process in detail. I'm just going to time lapse it and we'll catch up at the end when I'm filling up the transmission. viewers, the transmission is now back up, mounted in the truck, drive shaft's in, exhaust is connected, everything's back to the way it was, except I need to fill up the transmission. During the process of installation, I just pulled the drain plug on the transmission to see if there was fluid in it, and there was. So what I'm gonna do is likely add fluid until I start to see it register on the dipstick. You know, just 1 quart at a time and check it each and every time. And when I get to a point where it's registering on the dipstick, I'll start it up and run it and then continue to add until I get it to the proper level. It's nice to creep up on the proper level, but if you go too far, well, it's kind of a pain to get it back out. So that's what I'm doing. I guess I'm gonna start by seeing if there is anything on the dipstick at all. Because even with the engine off, there would be something, and there's nothing. So, like I said, 1 quart at a time until I get somewhere. What sucks about this is the fluid tends to hang out inside the dipstick tube. So when you go to take your readings, sometimes, well, it's not always as accurate as you'd like it to be. And when I initially filled this up, I really wanted to hear the engine run. And they told me, yeah, the whole thing will take 14 quarts. Well, I got 10 quarts in and it started running out the dipstick tube and it was a whole giant mess. I'm taking a different approach this time. So that's just after 1 quart. So dumping in a bunch of quarts to start with, I don't think it would have been the best way to handle this. But once I start it up, it'll start to go to a, let's call it a more reasonable level. Or maybe a better way to say it is a more accurate level. All right, that's starting to show almost to the full cold mark, but I haven't started it, so I can't really say that that is an accurate measurement. I was thinking about dumping 5 quarts in and then checking it. I think what I'll do now is just start it up, let it run, and then check the fluid level. I'm gonna let it all the way down though to make sure that it's level when I'm checking the fluid level, because that's also important. Still needs more. But now I'm gonna raise it up with the rear wheels off the ground, shift it through the gears and run it a little bit. That way all the fluid gets circulated through the transmission and all the circuits within it. And then I'll recheck the level. All right, reverse. Tires are spinning backwards. Drive. I'm gonna manually do it now. So first, second, third, and then drive. Let's check that level now. Went down quite a bit. I'm only going half a quart at a time now. I want to sneak up on it. I'm very happy with that. Let's go drive it. I'm not going to start out flogging it. It is warmed up to temperature, but I just want to shift it through the gears a few times and see what it does when you're driving it normally. I don't need to know what it does at full throttle just yet. All right, first, second, third, fourth. Seems to have all the gears. I forgot how good this truck runs. It's like a new truck. Smooth and powerful. All right, now we'll try a little more aggressive. Nobody behind us. All right, we're stopped. Medium throttle. Feels good. Shifted into all the gears. It's kind of what I needed. Got to pass somebody. Kick down. Actually, that shifts better than it did before. It didn't shift that good before. That's honestly shifting better and smoother. So thank you, Monster transmission. I will shift it manually, but I gotta wait for some traffic. Yeah, when it grabs second gears and the gear and the tires chirp, I like that. I'm gonna get this thing back to the shop. We'll check the fluid level. Call this done. I'm gonna be very happy with that. It dripped a little, but it was like right at the top of the mark for full hot. Here we are back from our drive. No significant leaks of any kind that I can see. There's up by the cooler lines. Everything looks pretty good. In all, I believe I put 7 quarts of transmission fluid in to get it where it is. And that includes the quart that I put inside the torque converter. So 6 quarts in the transmission and 1 quart in the torque converter. Seemed to put me where I needed to be. Can't say that that's going to be true for you, but I suggest you sneak up on it rather than dump a bunch in and hope for the best. I'm somewhat disappointed that Monster Transmission didn't give me a clear answer as far as what went wrong with this transmission. When I asked, and believe me, I asked, the only answer I got was, "We did a complete rebuild for you, Eric. You're welcome." Well, thank you very much, Monster. I knew you didn't have to do that, and I really appreciate that you went through the trouble to rebuild this transmission for me. However, I want to pass along useful information to my viewers to let them know, if they run into a similar issue, what they might be looking at. That's kind of what I do here. And I'm sorry that I fell short on this particular video, but I feel I did my due diligence by going through and checking all the electronics and the connectors and everything else. And by the way, the harness that runs between the transmission and the controller, well, that was a purpose-built harness by AGM that came with the controller. I don't think there's any issues inside of that. Also, it seems to be shifting fine now. I'm honestly at a loss as to what actually happened, but it's good now. Now, as far as that seemingly early 1-2 shift, I probably could go into the controller and start playing around with the settings and get that to shift a little more to my liking. I'm not covering that in this video, but I might cover it in a future video. It depends on what I find out, to be perfectly honest with you. But I will link additional videos and information down in the description. If you're interested in this build, I'll link those videos down in the description. Other tools, stuff like that. Also, Monster Transmission. So if you're looking for additional information, look down there. Also, a link to EricTheCarGuy.com if you have automotive questions not covered in this video. Thank you so much for watching today. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I'll see you next time.